The next downtown number 2 will arrive in 1 minute. Please stand away from the platform edge.
That is the voice of the New York City subway. And that is the voice of my next guest that you'll be hearing today. Her name is Bernie. And Bernie is an incredibly brave woman. Bernie transitioned from a man to a woman at the age of 66. And it's been 2.5 years now. And Bernie is living her authentic self. I think the first person that probably did this that the world kind of paid attention to more than anyone was when Bruce Jenner transitioned into Caitlyn Jenner. Bruce Jenner was a Olympic athlete. He was famous for that. He was married to Kris Jenner, one of the most famous people in the world today, part of the Kardashian group, was on the TV show Keeping Up with the Kardashian. All of his daughters and family are famous now. He had his own reality show once he transitioned to Caitlyn. And, we look back at that. Caitlyn was, did this at a much older age than people would do. And it was, not that everybody loves Caitlyn Jenner today because of her political stance and just how ridiculous she is supporting things that are against her and supporting MAGA and the Republican Party when they're taking away transgender rights from people across the country. And I don't understand that. But I think stories like Bernie's is so, so important to tell today because of the fact that this country is in such turmoil with taking away rights. There's so much transphobia now that people think it's okay to be against transgender people. And, people feel like because of who we have in the White House today, that they can be racist, they can be homophobic, they can be transphobic, they want to get rid of DEI. And then that's my political part of this conversation, and I'll stop there. But my point is how important it is to push these people on a stage and let them tell their story. And let's recognize the bravery that it took for someone like Bernie to come out as her true authentic self at the age of 66. She talks about in her interview how she was, married to a woman. She talks about that she has children and she lives in a small town in New Jersey. And all those things, I think, made it even more difficult. At least I think would make it more difficult for her to come out as who she really is. I will say that it wasn't until about 15 years ago or so, whenever I finally, I don't want to say accepted, but maybe understood a person that transitioned from one sex to the other. And I guess I always thought, I lived in South Beach in the 90s. I was in gay bars and LGBTQ plus bars, every night of the week when I was in college. And, when I moved to New York, it's not like I've never been exposed to a transgender person. I never really took the time to think about like what they were going through. I just thought it was so extreme that you would have a surgery or even multiple surgeries to change your sex. And what if, I always thought, what if that person makes a mistake and they've had the surgery and you can't go back, and, all these things that I used to kind of think about. And it wasn't until I was living in New York City when my friend Jen came to visit me, and my friend Gina and another friend from high school was there, and we went out to dinner, and we met a person that we went to high school with, and his name was Jeff. And in high school, Jeff and I, were both probably, at least I didn't know if I was gay, and I didn't, I was questioning my sexuality at some points, but I didn't come out. I definitely wasn't gay. In the 90s, you could not, in Miami, you could not come out as gay in high school. It was not acceptable. You would have probably been killed at some point, or harassed so badly or beat up or whatever, because it just was not acceptable then the way it is today. How kids come out and they're bisexual or they're fluid or pansexual or bisexual or gay. None of that would be possible back when I was growing up. So Jeff, who is now Jillian, has transitioned, and we met Jillian out for dinner. The three of us met Jillian, and I am the direct friend that always asks the inappropriate questions that isn't always politically correct. So I know Jillian was just like waiting for it that night. Like, what is Zach going to ask? And again, Jillian and I were not friends in high school before he transitioned. And we went to dinner and, we had a mutual friend. Our friend Jen and Gina were mutual friends. We just both were bitchy queens in high school and didn't want to be friends because we both probably somehow in the back of our heads, if we didn't know we were gay, we didn't want to be associated with each other because then people would think we were gay if we were seen together and stuff. Who knows what was going on in our heads back in high school. But this dinner gave me the opportunity not just to see a transgender person in a bar or a club or walking down the street or in a grocery store, but gave me the opportunity to sit down with someone that I knew before they transitioned, and I got to hear their story, and I got to hear what they went through. And that was the first time that it clicked with me, that I really understood, wow, it's not that they made a choice to say, I think I want to be a woman. And a transgender person that was born female, so you man, they're not saying, I think I want to be a man. It's something you were born, and I get it. They were born in the wrong body. They were not born correctly. And I respect it so much. And my guest today, Bernie, coming out and transitioning at the age of 66 is incredible. It shows incredible bravery, and her entire story is just so important again in today's world. And I want to promote people like Bernie and put them on my platform. So maybe people who don't understand transgender and don't understand why people do this, maybe stories that you hear like this will help you understand. And you'll understand that people are born like this. People don't go and transition just because they think it would be fun or they think it'd be cool to wear a dress. That's not the reason why. They were born literally in the wrong body. Psychologically, they are in the wrong body and they are doing whatever they can to be who they authentically are. And that's Bernie's story. And again, I think it's so important that everybody takes a moment, listens to this story, and you'll see that they're not doing anything to hurt anybody. And they are just living who they authentically are. And I respect it so much. And that's why whenever I'm doing my Listen Up Girl newscast, a lot of my stories are about transgender rights that are being taken away. And I'm talking about how homophobic the current White House administration is and how they're so focused on it. And I can't believe that we live in a world today where if a transgender woman goes into a bathroom, is in a stall using the bathroom that nobody, and they can't see anybody else, that people are so upset about this. It is beyond me that people are calling out people. I've done stories on my Listen Up Girl podcast where there are women that were born women. They just may be more butch or have a short haircut, or they've got this one woman had a hoodie zipped up and she was called out and said, "What are you doing in here? Get out of here. You're a man." She goes, "No, I'm a woman. I was born a woman." And she had to show her breasts to these people to prove that she was a woman. Now you have people that don't want to use the bathroom in public anymore because they're scared that they're going to get called out, or they'll use the family bathroom, that the individual stalls or the handicap stalls, instead of going in the handicap bathroom, instead of going into a woman's bathroom. It's crazy that we live in a world like this, and it's sad. And so I hope that Bernie's story and the other stories that you hear in my podcast will open up your mind. And I hope it reaches people that don't understand transgender people, and it educates them. So enjoy this podcast with Bernie because I think she's amazing. Thanks for listening. Hi, thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything and a Bit Gay podcast. Today I have a very special guest. Bernie is on my show, and Bernie came and reached out to me because they want to tell their story. What are your pronouns, by the way, Bernie?
She and her.
She and her. So welcome to my show. I'm so glad to have you on. I want you to tell the audience your whole story, but I love it that your voice is on the New York City subway.
Among other places, but that's probably the place where it's heard most.
Yeah. So that's amazing. And towards the end of this podcast, there was a little short movie or clip that you sent me that has your voice in it as the New York City subway. And I'm going to play that at the end so people that have been to New York or that live in New York, they'll know exactly who the voice is because I knew you right away after that. So.
Sure. No, that sounds great.
So tell me your story. So, tell my listeners your story. You have transitioned and you are 68. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. At least as of this recording. By the time it's released, I may be 69, but
okay.
As of today, I'm 68.
And when did you decide to make the transition? And it was 2.5 years ago. Is that accurate
Yes.
too?
I was 66 at the time when I decided to socially transition, which for me was sort of the final step in this whole process was the social transition because I had done a few things legally and medically, but socially was the big one for me.
And what made you want to do it? Well, let's go even further back. When did you realize that you were a female? Like, when did you kind of realize that?
I've known this all of my life that I can remember. I remember at 4 years old being very clear in my brain that I was a girl. So this is not some revelation that came to me much later in life. It was something that I always intrinsically knew about myself.
And did you act on it at all when you were younger or even in college? Did you ever dress like a woman? Did you tell me kind of your history about whenever you first experimented, I guess I would say.
Sure. Well, going back to that 4-year-old version of me, I was at my grandmother's house and I was sitting in front of her vanity and I was putting on her necklaces and putting powder on my face from a powder puff that she had at the vanity. So that was probably one of my earliest memories. But a year or two later, I remember my best friend lived across the street from me. She was a girl. And I convinced her that we should exchange clothing. I don't remember what she was wearing, but the fact that it was girls' clothing was something that I wanted to be able to put on. So those are some early examples. When I was older and a little more on my own, I would go into my mom's closet and put on a skirt or something like that. But it was always with the fear that somebody would discover me. And I was terribly afraid of what would happen if someone discovered me. There are a few Halloweens where I was able to go out as a girl.
Yeah.
But for the most part, there really wasn't a whole lot of experimentation. I did not cross-dress as a kid or as an adult in terms of going out and presenting that way. Really, the only time I started presenting in public was when I socially transitioned 2.5 years ago.
So before you transitioned to a female, what did you consider yourself? Did you consider yourself a gay male? Like, what did you consider yourself?
No, I considered myself a man who felt that they were trans. Once I became aware of that terminology, I'm older than the word transgender. So I certainly did not use that word to describe myself as a kid.
Yeah.
The phrase that was used a lot back in those days was a woman trapped in a man's body. And that might have been a way I would describe myself. Just this sense of knowing that I should have been born a girl. That was what I was meant to be. So I didn't really get stuck too much on the terminology, just that internal feeling of who I was and what I was.
And tell me what that feeling is like. Does it feel like like you're missing something of your life, or you're missing something is like missing
Yeah, I
part
think
of
that's
you or something? Like, how does that feel?
I felt that I was missing out on the things that girls got to do as I was a
Mhm.
kid, that I wanted to be able to do the things that girls were doing. I wasn't interested in, the sports that the boys were doing. I did it reluctantly because it was what I felt I had to do
Yeah.
to get through life. I wasn't very good at it, but I did that. I just kind of went on with that feeling of that's who I was. And I always tried to read as much as I could. Back in the days before the internet, it was really difficult to get information about people like myself.
And to find people like you as well,
Oh,
right?
yeah, very much so.
As you were growing up, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have a way to kind of learn about, and kind of like what you said before, transgender wasn't even really used back at that point. You said it was, what did you say? It was a woman trapped in a man's body, is what you
Mhm.
basically
That
said.
was a lot of how I heard it described.
Yeah, and so, people today are fortunate enough to have the internet and can meet people in the community and to research and also look at what other article. I mean, there's a million articles out now, good and bad, coming out from this government. So tell me, like, what you were doing as you were growing up, trying to explore and even to educate yourself.
At that time, somebody transitioning, that was news back then. And I was following that story very closely. And at some point, I decided that I was going to I tried to find every little piece of information that I could. I would go to the library and try to find any magazine articles or books. There was a publication, maybe it's still being published, I don't know, called The Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature. And it would come out 4 times a year.
Hmm.
And it had an index of magazine stories. So every time a new one of these would come out, I would go to my local library and look up articles, which at that time were categorized under sex change. That was how they were categorized. And I would hope that somewhere in the library they were subscribing to this magazine and that particular edition was on the shelves. And if it was, I would just devour that information.
Hmm.
There was a story that came out in the actually more like the early 1970s. A teacher in a neighboring school district here in New Jersey by the name of Paula Grossman. And she was a music teacher in an elementary school. And she had transitioned in the break between the end of the one semester and the start of the next school year. And I was just reading that story about her because it was being covered quite heavily in the local media, just trying to learn a little bit more about her because she was the first person that I had ever known locally that was trans. And I wanted to learn more about this. And I finally decided that I was going to go to the library, and I found her address in a phone book, and I made arrangements to call her,
Hmm.
or actually for her to call me at a payphone one evening. I didn't want to have her call me at my house because I was afraid of being overheard by my parents or brother and sister. So we made arrangements for her to call me at a payphone, and she did. And she was the first person I ever knowingly spoke with who was trans. And it meant so much to me to finally connect with somebody who I knew felt the same way I did about myself. And that really was a huge moment for me.
And how old was she?
I think at the time she was maybe in her early 50s.
Did you ever meet in person?
Unfortunately, no, that is one of my
Oh,
regrets is that I never did follow up with her after that. I think I was, again, just terribly afraid. And she's since passed away, unfortunately. But I have had an opportunity to share her story in a few different places. So that's meant a lot to me.
yeah. And after you spoke to her, and it gave you, I'm assuming it gave you some hope, or
Mhm.
just, maybe a clearer path even, but
Mhm.
you continue to live your life as a man at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I lived my life for all intents and purposes as a straight guy. That was how the
Really?
world saw me, was a straight guy. I was married, had children. I had a relatively successful career, had a house, did all those things that a middle class person
Yeah.
was supposed to do in life. Had a lot of friendships with both men and women. And I don't think anybody suspected that there was anything different about me. So when I finally started coming out and sharing this with people, it was something of a surprise and a revelation to many of them.
And did you have any friends that didn't accept it?
Not close friends. There were some friends and people who, while they didn't necessarily not accept it, they've fallen away. I've noticed that
Mhm.
they've discontinued connections with me. And
Yeah.
that hurts a little, but that is their decision. I have not cut off connections with any of these folks that I was friendly with over the years, but there have been other people where friendships have grown quite a bit. People that I've known. For instance, one of my closest female friends is somebody that I've known since 3rd grade,
Oh,
and
wow.
she and I are very close friends today.
And what can I ask about your sexuality? So you were married to a woman, had kids. Were you a straight were you straight? Were you attracted to women?
I was and I am.
You
So
are
yes,
okay.
I would consider myself straight up until
Okay.
my transition, and then suddenly that switched as well. So
Yeah.
now I would
Now
be
you're a lesbian.
lesbian. Yes.
Okay. And did you throughout growing up, did your mom or dad ever kind of say I guess they had no idea because you didn't really know either growing up either, right? I mean,
Well,
or
I
you knew
knew.
something, but you didn't know enough.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even that. I think it was just that I was afraid. I was terribly afraid. Again, think of what it was like in the 1960s and the 1970s,
Yeah.
that this was just generally not acceptable. I suspect both my parents have passed away, so I don't have an opportunity to ask them, but I suspect that they suspected something about
Yeah.
me. First of all, my eagerness to dress as a girl on Halloween, the fact that I was not terribly good at sports. I had a couple of instances that they did become aware of. I told you about that instance where my friend and I, when we were about 6 years old, a
Yeah.
girl and I exchanged clothes. And that was discovered by her older brother, who shared it with his parents, who told my parents. And my parents, they weren't upset, but they told me, you can't do this. This is not allowed. And then there was another time when I was older where I told my sister, who's about 6 years younger than me, that I always wished that I was a girl. But I said
Mhm.
it immediately after those words left my mouth. Don't tell mom and dad. Don't tell mom and dad. Well, she's a little sister. She was only 10 years old at the time. So she did tell mom and dad. And again, they confronted me, but it wasn't with anger or upsetness. It was with concern. And I do regret that I did not share that with them. But I think they would have wanted to do what they saw was best for me. And unfortunately, at that time, there really wasn't any opportunity to be treated as a transgender person
Mhm.
from the medical world or society or anything like that. So I don't know that they would have had many options that would have been available to them, unfortunately, in those times.
And how do you feel about the world today? So I do another podcast called Listen Up Girl, and I do LGBTQ plus news, and I do it like 3 times a week, and I do kind of like the quick. I do maybe the top. I don't know. I do 10 to 15 minutes of news, and I just kind of
Mhm.
cover what's happening in the LGBTQ plus news. And unfortunately, and I don't want to get too political on this because I try to keep it off the show, but it's very hard not to in today's world.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, most stories that I have to say now are negative, and probably 50% are anti trans about all the stuff that the United States government is looking to do to take away gender affirming care, to take away, even for the LGBTQ plus community, the 988 suicide hotline. They're taking away the option for LGBTQ. I mean, it just goes on and on and on about their rights. How is that making you feel in today's world, living in the United States with all this challenges and all these people being so hateful and vocal about their hate?
It raises a few different feelings. First of all, certainly great disappointment on my part about what is happening, and not just what is happening, but the lack of pushback by larger organizations, that they seem to surrender so easily to a lot
Mhm.
of these things. One of the hats I wear, I consider myself a journalist. So I also try not to be political. But at the same time, I feel just my sharing my story, my being very public about who I am and my experiences, I hope raises trans visibility. And I suppose in some sense, that in and of itself is a political act. But you won't hear me talking about political parties or
Mhm.
individual politicians and things of that sort. What I want to do when I share my story is share my humanity, because I think that's the most powerful thing that I can do, is telling people what my experiences have been, what my life is like now. But at the same time, one of the things, there was a protest on Valentine's Day at the park across from the Stonewall Inn.
Mhm.
And this was the day after the National Park Service had eliminated the
Mm.
letters T and Q
Yeah.
from the Park Service site for the Stonewall National
Yeah.
Monument. And I spoke at a protest that morning that followed. And one of the things that I said then, and it still holds true today, is while I may be disappointed and disheartened at times, I don't want to give any government, any organization, any individual the power to take away my trans joy. I want to experience that. I am going to experience that, and I am not going to allow them to steal that from me. And that is
Good for you.
something that I'm very steadfast with.
Yeah. And what about Caitlyn Jenner coming out at a older age too? Did that kind of, I don't know, did that kind of, make you think it's okay? Because I mean, I'm not sure how old Caitlyn is. I know she's in her late 60s or 70s, maybe?
She's a bit older than me, as I believe, yes.
Yeah, so she came out later in life, a public Olympian with the Kardashians, very high profile visibility, and, it's great that Caitlyn did that,
Mhm.
and did that kinda give you, like, a little bit of a push to maybe be who you wanted to be at a later age in life?
I remember following her story very closely, certainly her interview on TV with Diane Sawyer. I
Yeah.
watched that with great interest, but I don't think that that really had that much of an impact in terms of me deciding what I was going to do. I think what had an impact on me were things that were much more personal. For instance, it was 2017 when I really started down the road of transition. There was an app that had come out called Face App, which I think a lot of trans people are probably familiar with. You could
Mhm.
upload a photo of yourself and it would use AI to change your gender.
Mm.
And I really wasn't anticipating that it was going to do much when I uploaded, because I had seen other things in the past. And basically, what they did is they put a wig on your
Yeah.
head and would make your lips red. And, it looked kind of clownish, to be
Yeah.
quite honest. So I was not anticipating that this was going to do anything wonderful. But after I uploaded that photo and I saw what it returned, I saw what I felt was the first time a realistic representation of how I might look as a woman. Because one of my big fears was that if I did transition, I would look like a clown, that I would be an object of ridicule. And when I saw this photo, it showed me a resemblance to my mom, which I had not seen before. And I saw myself under that photo, so to speak. So that really made a big difference. And it started a very slow, relatively speaking, process of my transitioning. First I did the lowest dose possible of hormones so
Mhm.
that I could see if just having estrogen in my system perhaps would lower the need to want to transition. I legally changed my name to Bernie. It's the name I've always gone by, but legally getting rid of my male name and just using Bernie exclusively, because Bernie can also be short for Bernadette.
Yeah.
So I felt, okay, that's something. I changed my driver's license. I did all these other things. And social transition for me was the final step. It was the most important step, though, because trans people, we come from a lot of different perspectives. And for me, I think what I suffered the most from was not body dysmorphia, but social dysmorphia. I wanted to be seen as a woman, accepted by the world as a woman. And it wasn't until I actually socially transitioned that I found what I had always been craving.
Tell me about your first time you went out socially.
The first time, and this was what convinced me that I was going to finally socially transition, it was November of 2022. A support group that I was a member of was holding an annual awards ceremony at a hospital in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been to this in years past. This was the first time they were holding it in person following the COVID pandemic. And it was always described as a semi-formal affair.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past, I'd gone in a jacket and tie. But all these people knew who I was. They knew my story. They knew I was trans. And I felt, well, this is a safe place. Maybe I can do something that would be a little bit different. So I reached out to an older trans female friend and said to her, I'd like to add a little feminine flair to whatever I go dressed as, figuring maybe I would wear a scarf instead of a tie. I don't know what it was,
Yeah.
but something, at least something that was a little bit different. And she surprised me by saying, you come down to my house before the event. I will have a dress for you. I will do your makeup. Go get a wig. I went to, it was right around Halloween time. So I went to Party City and bought this cheap wig. And I went down to her house. Another friend had donated her real wig. So I didn't have to wear this terrible looking Halloween type wig. And she gave me a dress, did my makeup. And I went to this event for the first time in public outside of Halloween, presenting as the person I always felt myself to be on the inside. And I had a tremendous reception from all those people who were there because, again, this was a very open and accepting group. It was a relatively low pressure type of event to come out at.
Yeah.
And it felt great. But after the event was over, I had to go back to her house and change back into my boy clothes. I describe it as my Cinderella night because if you know the story of Cinderella, her fairy godmother comes along and moves the wand and she has a beautiful gown and a pumpkin turns into a coach, but she had to be back by midnight. Well, sort of that was what happened with me. I had to be back by midnight and I had to go back to my boy clothes. But that was the night I decided that I was going to socially transition. So that was just about 2 months before I actually socially transitioned.
I can imagine the nerves and the anxiety, though, going out, even though you knew these people and you thought they would accept it. I could just imagine just how you felt. I mean, it must have been so, and was it a sense of relief once you kind of got in there and you seen that everybody was just like, okay.
Yeah. I think it was very much like that. The little caveat that came with that, though, was after the event ended and we were going to go back to my friend's house, she wanted to stop off for a bite to eat. So now I'm going into a place where I don't know what kind of a reaction I'm going to receive.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very nervous about that. We went into a diner and I had to order, and I really had not done a lot with my voice to that point. So I was very nervous about that. But I had no problems. I didn't see anybody staring at me. And it came off relatively well. So that was even in some ways more nerve-wracking than the event because these were people I did not know. I had no idea what their politics were, where they stood on this. So that was a bit scary.
So you live in the New Jersey, New York area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a more, I think it's more accepting than other parts of the country, especially New York City.
Yes.
And, have you ever thought about if you, when you travel and you leave the tri-state area that you live in now, let's say you have to go to, I don't know, let me think of a state that, let's say you had to go to
Texas or
Alabama.
Florida.
Florida, exactly. Let's say you go to Florida, even though it depends on where you go in Florida. I grew up in Miami, and it would be fine if you went to Miami, or at least it was. I mean, I haven't lived there in a long time, so I shouldn't say that. But let's say you went to Florida, North Florida, and
Mhm.
how does that worry you at all? Do you ever have any kind of anxiety or fear whenever you go? I mean, me as a gay man, if I, one of my best friend lives in Alabama,
Mhm.
and her entire family knows I'm gay and loves me and doesn't care, and they're open and they don't care about anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I'd be a little, nervous going to visit her. I've never gone to visit her, and we've been friends since the 6th grade.
Mhm.
We grew up in Miami together, and I live in Boston, and she lives there now. But she always comes to see me, or we go somewhere else. Like, I've never been to her house, which is so strange. And it's not because I'm scared to go, but I guess because there's nothing to do there also. But I just, it's not probably anywhere that, she has one gay friend
Mhm.
that lives in her area, or that she works with. She doesn't, there's nobody else gay that they know. So,
Mhm.
but how does that make you feel, like if you have to travel somewhere that's like an Alabama or a Florida or somewhere even in the Midwest?
I've done a little bit of traveling since I've transitioned. I've been to North Carolina, I've been to Georgia, and just this summer I went to Ireland.
Okay.
And I was a bit nervous with all of those trips and had absolutely no problems when I was on any of those trips. I was especially nervous about going to Ireland, not because of Ireland, but
Yeah.
because I knew I would have to go through TSA and Customs and Border Protection. So I was worried about that. My passport, unfortunately, had not been updated in time. So it still had a male photo of me and was marked male on the passport. And outside of having to go to a secondary person to pass, so to speak,
Mhm.
I had no problems. I had no issues getting into Ireland. The inspector at Irish immigration kept on looking down and up between my passport and my face, which
Mhm.
obviously did not match. And I just said to him, "I'm trans," and that was it. That he was fine with it.
Yeah.
He just wanted to make sure that I was really the person that was presenting this passport to.
Yeah.
So I have had no problems in my travels. Um, I know that that's not always the case for other people. I think some of it is I've been relatively successful in passing. Now, that's not a key for being trans, obviously, and I don't want to pretend that
Yeah.
that's something that everyone should worry about, but it was something that I wanted to work on for my own safety. So the voice was part of that, and just trying to look like another 60-plus-year-old woman when I was moving around,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do, and I have been fortunate. I've not had any problems. I've used, women's restrooms, a changing room at a Kohl's down in North Carolina. No issues in any of these places,
Yeah.
fortunately. But again, some of that is also good fortune on my part.
Yeah. And have you had any bad experiences ever?
Not really. Nothing in person that has been a bad experience. I've had some people that were part of my life that, like I say, had cut themselves out of my life. I had a note from a neighbor, a boy who lived right behind my house when I was growing up, send me a fairly nasty email. Um,
That
but
since you've transitioned?
yes, yes, this was fairly recent,
Really?
and for the most part, I don't respond to trolls when they send
Yeah.
stuff, but if
Good for
it's
you.
somebody that I know personally, I will make some sort of a response. And not I don't get into an argument with them about, being trans is okay or anything like that, but basically saying you have a right to your opinion, that you don't accept this. This is America still. I have a right to my opinion, and that's pretty much where I've left it with folks like that I've known.
Aren't you curious to know why they don't accept it though? Because it's not hurting anyone. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not changing anybody's life that
Mhm.
you've transitioned. So I always just wonder, like, why people care.
I think in this particular case, and in the case of somebody else in my town that said some negative things, it's either religious or
Mhm.
political leanings. And religiously, they may come from a belief that this is sinful and, the whole rigmarole around that. Or politically, they know that their particular belief system says that being trans is illegitimate. What I don't understand is why they feel a need to share that with me. If they want to believe that, like I say, this is America, that's their right to believe what they want to believe. But I don't see why they necessarily feel a need to share that opinion with me.
Yeah.
It's not going to change me. I know I'm not going to change their opinion, so I don't try to do that. If it's somebody that has some honest questions, I will try to respond to them and tell them what I feel and a little bit of my experience. But that's about the extent of it.
Yeah. Do you have younger people? So, you talked about the woman that you found and went to a payphone to talk to and stuff, and which was amazing that you were able to do that. But nowadays there's a lot more ways to communicate. Do you have younger people or even people your age coming to you now talking about, I want to transition. Can you help me? Can you guide me? Are you giving anybody advice on this?
A little, not so much advice, but just sharing some of my experiences. And I think even more importantly, being there as support for them because there are very few trans people who go through transition unscathed, whether
Mhm.
it's jobs, family, friends, whatever, neighbors. And to have somebody that you can share with that is not going to judge you, who is not going to say something negative, if I can be there for them, that's great. Now, the other hand, we haven't really talked about this yet, but my transition has been fairly public, and I'm a fairly public figure in and around New York City. And when my story has been told, I've seen comments on social media from a number of young trans women, people I've never met, I don't know them personally, but they just feel that my sharing my story, my voice being out there in public helps them feel being seen. And that
Amazing.
means a lot to me, that just my visibility means a lot, even if I am not sharing necessarily directly with them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm glad that you're doing things like my podcast and doing this to kind of, the more people are exposed to it, the more eventually they'll accept it and they'll realize that this is just the world. I think
Mhm,
the other thing that people don't realize is that transgender people have been around for a very long time. It isn't something that just came up in the last 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. I mean,
mhm,
it's been around forever. And
mhm.
it just, if you, whenever I went to Mumbai, India, this was a long time ago. There are,
Haraja, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
yeah, these women in India have been around for, you know, centuries, it
Mhm,
sounds like. And,
mhm,
and if you look at history, it's something that's always been there. And it's just maybe not been talked about as much because now we have, the whole internet and we can communicate much more. And it's not just like you said, when you were growing up, you had no way to find out information other than going to a library. And now the world is just a different place.
mhm. Yes, oh, without a doubt, and even going to the library, there was a scarcity of information that was
Yeah.
available to me, so it was very difficult to learn about it.
Do you have a group of friends that are transgender that you associate with or you get together and do things with?
Yes, yes, and they range in age. There are some who are much younger than me, some who are a bit older than I am, but, yeah, I love getting together with them, and, sometimes we'll do things that have nothing to do with being trans. I went to a game night, fairly recently where for the first time in my life I played Dungeons and Dragons, which
Okay.
I know a lot of younger trans people do play, but it was not something that was big when I was growing up, so it was not part of my experience. But I'll do things like that, but there'll be other times where just two of us will get together and talk about what's going on in our lives.
And do you feel like people are becoming more accepting today than they were, I don't know, 15 years ago?
It's a mixed bag, I think.
Mhm.
Some of the people are much more accepting because they know more about it. They've learned a little bit more about it. They've started to see people in their lives who are trans. So that part has been more accepting. But on the other hand, there are people who are becoming much more vociferous in their opposition to
Mm.
trans people and are really actively taking roles to try to deny trans people a place in society. So it's a mix. There are some who are more supportive, others who are definitely less supportive. And then there are those in the middle who just want to learn. And when I talk to groups, what I will say is as long as you're asking a question in good faith, don't worry about having to be politically correct or having to have all the right words when you ask a question. Ask away, and I will try to share with you a little bit of my life and have you get to know me a little bit. But I don't want people to be fearful that if they say the wrong thing or if they use the wrong pronoun or anything like that, that
Mm.
I'm going to be upset with them. If they're doing it in good faith, that is all I ask.
So I'll just kind of tell you, I mean, I lived in New York City for a long time. And again, like I said, I grew up in Miami, south of Miami, I grew up, and I was in school, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So being gay, transgender, bisexual, none of that was talked about then
Mhm,
at all. Now I know kids are coming out um, in middle school now and saying that they're not sure what their sexuality is or whatever. And it's such a different world now.
mhm,
But whenever I was living in New York, my friend Jen came to visit me, and my friend Gina that lived there in New York also. And we had a guy. His name was Jeff when we were in high school together. My friend Jen went to college with him also. We found out probably after we graduated college that he transitioned. Her name is now Jillian, and we all met for dinner. And it was kind of the first time. I mean, I was in New York City. I seen everything, in the world happening in New York City. So there was nothing that would surprise me, but actually sitting down with somebody that I went to high school with when it wasn't accepted and talking about their, whole journey and
mhm,
what they did and how they came to accept it was really quite interesting and amazing to me because it was so brave for them to do this. And yeah, and so we had a dinner. I'm very direct with my questions sometimes, maybe politically incorrect. I think she was ready for anything to come out, but I didn't get politically incorrect. Maybe I would have, but we had another friend that interrupted the conversation with something else. But she answered like everything that we asked, and she's just like, ask whatever you want,
mhm,
like and she really wanted to educate us and just to have us know, what she went through and stuff. And I thought it was just an amazing way to kind of share the story.
mhm.
Just, educating three people, and she's known one of them since she was in kindergarten, I think. So
Wow.
they've known each other their entire lives. So it was,
Mhm.
quite a change.
And I think, like anything, there are different personalities and different type of people. There are people like me who are not afraid and not hesitant to share our stories, but there are other people who are more private and don't wish to share their stories.
Yeah.
So you have to respect where that person is coming from, I think.
Yeah, and I do. Yeah, and I totally respect it. I mean, I will say, I'll just kind of admit this, and I don't think I've ever said this out loud. Um, maybe 20 years ago, I didn't understand transgender. I didn't get
Mhm,
it, even though I was in Miami Beach in the 90s. Whenever it was, everything was, there was lots of transgender people in the 90s then, and I think maybe it's been more than 20 years, but 22 years, 25 years ago, I didn't understand like why somebody would be transgender.
Mhm,
I just didn't compute with me.
mhm.
And of course, then I've become more mature and I am more educated and stuff, and not a stupid kid anymore. Um, and I realize, that, and also this podcast, having people on like you, is educating other people too, because it's not just the LGBTQ plus community that listens to this podcast. I've been told by emails. There's lots of straight people that listen to this podcast as well, and I've been told that in
Mhm.
emails. So if even if we're like reaching a couple of people that have not been exposed to transgender, and it just educates them, I feel like it's a win.
Yeah. Oh, no, and that's always been my attitude. I've spoken to groups where there are over 1,000 people, but I've also spoken to groups like a book club where there are 4 or 5 people. And any opportunity that I have, I welcome those opportunities because usually those are people who want to learn. They're
Mhm.
open to learning about this. Being trans, I don't think anyone other than a trans person can fully understand what it's like to be trans, but you can still be a good ally and be supportive
Yeah,
of someone who is trans and have a better understanding of what it's like to be trans. But it's a process we all go through.
yeah,
None of us are just instantly
yeah.
accepting and supportive, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I was never like against it. I just didn't understand it.
Mhm,
It
mhm,
didn't. I didn't. I thought it was such a big decision.
mhm,
And you know what else helped me? Just educate me is that Amanda Lepore. I'm sure you know who she is in New York, a famous transgender woman. She wrote a book, and I don't know. It was probably 15 years ago at this point that she wrote it, or maybe 10. And she talked about her whole story growing up in New Jersey as a boy and the things that she had to go through, and her life. And I don't know if something just clicked with me with that book too. And I wrote her on Facebook or whatever platform she was on at the time, and I just said, "Your book is so amazing, and I'm so glad that you put it out because it's going to educate people and have them really have more of an understanding about being transgender, and also just to know what people go through. I mean,
mhm,
it's not. I'm sure, like you said, it was not an easy. You waited till you were 66 years old to actually do it,
mhm.
so it's not an easy decision, and I just think that people should be more sympathetic with that in a way, if that's the right word to say, or just like, listen,
Yeah.
open your mind and just like listen is what I hope people do.
Exactly, and as you said before, it's not hurting other people.
It's not.
My transitioning is not going to hurt my neighbors or my workmates or my classmates or any of those people. It may cause them surprise, it may cause them some perplexity, but it's not harming their lives.
Yeah. What's the reason you're kind of doing this? That you're going out and you're doing podcasts and doing this just to educate people and tell them your story?
In part, I when I did my coming out letter, I had told most of the people who were close to me, family, friends, that I was transitioning before I shared it with the world. But finally, a few days before I socially transitioned, I did put out the coming out letter on social media.
Yeah.
And one of the things I said in that note was, I hope that I could be an educator. My background is communications. So I felt that I'm someone who is comfortable in front of a microphone, speaking to a reporter, in front of a camera, whatever it may be. That's a place where I am comfortable. And again, I know not everyone else is comfortable with that. And so I felt that I was in a good place to share that. But I also knew that as a person, I was somewhat well known in the New York metro area because my voice is used on the New York subway. So I had that platform, so to speak, as a head start where people were going to be curious. And I wanted to use that to its advantage as much as I could. And I wanted to share, even before I knew I was going to socially transition, I started to feel that I needed to share with people that I was trans because I saw what was going on in the country where some of the states were making laws
Mhm.
that were against trans people and trying to make their lives so difficult. And I felt that it was important since trans people are only about 1% of the population,
Mhm.
which means many people don't have a personal relationship with someone who is trans. So if I could be one more voice, one more person that somebody could relate to, that I could share my story with, I felt that was important. And I believe visibility accomplishes a couple of things. First of all, it's encouragement for other trans people because I know how much that meant to me
Mhm.
when I saw other people's stories before I transitioned to learn about their lives. But it's also important in terms of increasing acceptance and understanding and support. And if I can do anything with that, I want to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm really glad that you're doing this because it's people like you that make people understand it's not, you're not hurting anybody. And the more visibility you give, like you just said, it just makes it more part of everyday life and part of people's world. So that's amazing. And I'm so happy I got to meet you. And I'm so
Thank you,
happy I
Zach.
got to interview you. You're amazing.
Thank you so
And
much.
if somebody wants to learn more about you, do you have a website or social media or what's your podcast that they can go to?
My podcasts are probably not going to be all that interesting because two of them are geared toward transportation. It has
Okay.
nothing to do with being trans. And the other one is something that I do for my hometown of Cranford, New Jersey.
Okay.
But if you look up my name, you will find lots of information about me. You will find stories that have been written by others. You'll find videos that I've done. So you can find a lot of information about me that's online simply by plugging in my name to your favorite search engine.
Great. And do you mind if I take that video and put it in the description of the podcast so people can watch that little 3 or 4 minute video that you
No,
sent?
that would be great. That was something that, again, came up as a surprise, and it's been very well received. It's won several Clio awards.
Yeah.
It's had quite an impact. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. I showed it to my husband. I'm like, oh, what do you think about this? I mean, he's a guy from Long Island, lived in Manhattan. That's where we met. It was in Manhattan. He's like, it's a woman riding the subway. What do you want me to say? I'm like, did you listen to the story? I said, you were like looking at TV and not looking at this video. So, but
Well, there have been a few things, and there was also a piece that I did last year for CBS where they have a feature called Note to Self,
okay.
where you write a letter to a younger version of yourself. And I did a note to 18-year-old Bernie, just kind of encouraging her as to, life, you will finally get to experience what you've always dreamed of at some point. But it was my own words and I spoke it directly into a camera. It was the first time that I had written a piece for
Mhm.
television. And again, what meant a lot to me on that particular piece was that it was being shown on TV stations in states like Florida and
Mhm.
Texas and Utah. So young trans people who maybe were watching it or parents of trans people could come to another little bit of an understanding.
Yeah.
And, again, because of the internet, it will live forever. So it's always
Yeah.
available online.
Bernie, I just want to end the podcast by saying I think you should, if you don't do this, you should do this. You should always take a moment just to kind of like think about the impact that you have on people and how you're helping the world. Like,
Thank
I
you.
think it's so nice and so important. And if you just think about just the people that you're reaching that you didn't have when you were growing up or whenever you had these thoughts in your head and stuff when you were, looking up that person in the phone book and calling from a payphone. I
Mhm.
mean, just this interview could just change somebody's life and it could really just help people. So I really hope that you do take a moment once in a while to think about how amazing that is of the things that you're doing and the message that you're putting out there.
Oh, thank you so much, Zach, for saying that. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of your podcast.
Yeah, you were great. Everybody, I will put the video in. I'm also going to play at the end of this podcast the subway message that's in the video. But you can also watch. It's like a 3 or 4 minute video, and I love the video. So take a look at it, and yeah, and even though even though Bernie says the podcasts aren't interesting, I still think you should maybe go check them out and see what you think. So I'll put a link to both podcasts in the description of this podcast as well. So
thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being on. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, everyone. Also leave a comment. Let us know what you thought about the interview with Bernie. And thanks, Bernie, for being on.
Thank you so much, Zach. It was great.